You don't want to control aggression. You want to integrate it. And if it's integrated, that's the integration of the shadow from the Jungian perspective, and something I talk a lot about in my lectures. It's like you need to have the capacity for danger. You need to be dangerous, but you need to learn how to not use it except when it's necessary. And that is not the same as being harmless. Harmless, that's a terrible virtue. It's like a rabbit. There's nothing virtuous about harmlessness. It just means you're ineffectual.
I think there are some people who through their harmlessness become iconic and they become symbols. I think the Gandhi and the principle of non-violence.
He's not harmless. He just transcended his deep violence. That is a completely different thing.
Okay.
Without that capacity, there would have been no way he would have had the strength of character that he had. He was an integrated person, not a harmless person.
Okay.
That's a very, very different thing. And you want to see what the dark parts of you are attracted to. It helps you keep an eye on where things can go if they go badly sideways. It's very helpful for people to hear that they should make themselves competent and dangerous and take their proper place in the world.
Competent and dangerous?
Oh.
Why dangerous?
Because it's the alternative to being weak. And weak is not good.
How is it good to be dangerous?
Because it makes you formidable. And life is a very difficult process, and it's not you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. That doesn't mean that you should be cruel. It doesn't mean any of that. There's a statement in the New Testament, the meek shall inherit the earth. But the meek isn't well translated. It means something more like those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. That's a way better way of thinking about it. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order, right? And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. It's like, that's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea. Because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility. You'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous. Maybe a man is better when he's a dangerous man who's being good than he would be if he was just a good man who wasn't capable of being dangerous. And I believe that because the best men that I've ever met are very dangerous men. You don't mess with them.
Yeah.
So, and you know that as soon as you meet, you have to push beyond the persona, and that's what the integration of the shadow does from the Jungian perspective. It's like to pull that monster that's being edited out of you, to pull that back in and to allow that to reveal itself within your increasingly sophisticated way of being. And then you're not just a persona. You can't escape from your persona unless you can say no. That if you're a persona, then you're an obedient citizen. But the problem with being an obedient citizen is that if the society tells you to march the Jews off to the death camp, for example, and you're obedient, then that's what you'll do. And it isn't like society is civilized and then all of a sudden you're performing some act of atrocity. That isn't how it works. It's like you're obedient citizen and then you're asked to violate your conscience a little bit.
Yeah.
And you have to, because you don't have anything other than that persona. And that's obedience. And so a little more obedience is demanded, and you say, okay, well, and then you're a little bent, because the society is becoming a little bent, and then you're a little weaker. Then you're asked to violate your conscience a little bit more, and you think, well, there's a little less of me, and the pressure's on a little more, and I could have said no before, but I didn't. So you say yes again, then you say yes again, and then you have a society where 1/3 of the population is informing on the other 2/3. It's hell. It's like, well, so how do you say no? Well, that's the shadow. But the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no. Wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it. Without the capability for mayhem, you're a potential victim to mayhem. So you need your sword. It should be sheathed, but you need to have it. And it's very frequently the case. If you treat someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's two things you have to do. You have to help them develop a very articulated philosophy of evil, because otherwise their brain bothers them over and over and over. Why were you so naive? How did you become victimized? These are good questions. You don't want to have that happen to you again. You don't want to be exploited twice. Okay, so your eyes have to open up. You need to be able to withstand tragedy, and you need to be able to withstand malevolence, because those are the forces that are always working against you. in the last 20 years, the constant message to young people is self-esteem, feel good about yourself. It's like, I don't buy that. I think that you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, Jesus Christ, I could be a hell of a lot better than I am.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, there's nothing more complimentary to tell a young person than that. It's like, look at you, you're a wreck. Grow the hell up. There's so much more to you than you're manifesting than you can hardly imagine. It's like, well, you think that's a criticism. It's like, no, it's not. It's a great compliment. It's like, look at how much more you could bring out into the world.
Yeah.
Get your aggression under control. Strengthen yourself. Like, take on some responsibility. See if you have enough bloody courage to tell the truth. Put your life together. Stop whining. And the men eat that up because no one's ever told them that, which just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And, you know, the boys are pulling out of everything. They're pulling out of university. They're pulling out of life. They're pulling out of marriage. It's easier to occupy yourself trivially than it is to do something difficult. So, like, there's a big tendency in that direction to begin with, because it's easier to do nothing than to take responsibility, play games than to plan for the future.
Nietzsche said, if you look into an abyss for too long, you risk having the abyss gaze back into you, right? The idea is that if you look at something monstrous, you have a tendency to turn into a monster. And people are often very afraid of looking at monstrous things exactly for that reason. And then the question is, well, should you turn into a monster? And the answer to that is, yes, you should. But you should do it voluntarily and not accidentally. And you should do it with the good in mind, rather than falling prey to it by possession, essentially, because that's the alternative. Now, how does it possess you? That's easy. Your suffering makes you bitter. Your bitterness makes you resentful. Your resentment makes you vengeful. So when I tell young men that, they think, well, lots of them are competitive. They're low in agreeableness, you know, because that's part of being competitive temperamentally. It's like, is there something wrong with being competitive? There's nothing wrong with it. There's something wrong with cheating. There's something wrong with being a tyrant. There's something wrong with winning unfairly. All of those things are bad. But you don't want people to win? What's the difference between trying to win and striving? You want to eradicate striving? Let's say that you can pick your level of competition in life to some degree. Okay, so let's say you pick a level of competition where you're always winning. It's like, well, all that means is you've picked the wrong level of competition.
Yes.
Because, you know, like, let's say you're a grandmaster chess player and all you do is play amateurs, and every night you go home and congratulate yourself on what a genius you are because you just stomp these people left, right, and center. It's like, you're not a genius. You're a dimwit.
Right.
What you should be doing is playing people who are beating you like, well, as much as you can tolerate.
Right.
So maybe that's 40% of the time. Maybe it's 60% of the time. But that way, because to be a winner, you want to be disciplined. You want to know what you're doing. And then you want to be on the edge where your skills are being developed. And if you're going to be on the edge where your skills are going to be developed, you're at a place where losing is always a possibility, because otherwise you're not pushing yourself beyond your current capacity.
Can a person who doesn't have the option to be evil be good? And I would say no. So maybe that's the reason that, metaphysically speaking, you know, and I don't know where you are when you're speaking metaphysically exactly, but the question of why is there evil in the world is a constant question. It's like, it's possible that without the possibility of evil, there cannot be good. Good requires the possibility of evil. And maybe good is so good that the fact that it requires the possibility of evil is acceptable. Maybe it's even desirable. The hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster.
We've met some of your fans, and we got the impression they were all male fans, the ones that we talked to. And that they were struggling with their manhood, and that you give them this message that it's okay to be a man.
It's not okay. It's necessary. What the hell are we going to do without men? You look around the city here, you see all these buildings go up. These men, they're doing impossible things. They're under the streets, working on the sewers. They're up on the power lines in the storms and the rain. They're keeping this impossible infrastructure functioning. This thing that works in a miraculous manner. They work themselves to death, and often literally. And the gratitude for that is sorely lacking, especially among the people who should be most grateful. They take everything they have for granted, failing to understand entirely that there's a massive infrastructure of unbelievably hardworking, solidly laboring, working class men breaking themselves in half on a regular basis, making sure that everything that always breaks works. And so a little gratitude for that is in order. And it's very useful to tell everyone, not just men, that they have an important role to play